Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AMPC webinar this week. Today, we're lucky enough to have Ian Jenson. The majority of people that have registered, I'm pretty sure, are familiar with Ian and all the great work that he's doing within the micro and supply chain space. So today, he's going to be talking to us about the latest issues around Salmonella across the globe, and being able to give us some of the activities that MLA and AMPC are working on in the temperature control in the cold supply chain. So thank you, Ian, for today. For those that are new to the system, you're not able to actually ask questions directly on this platform, but we really encourage you to put questions forward. So to be able to do that, there is a questions tab on your toolbar. If you type in your questions, when we get to the appropriate sort of spots for questions, Ian and Matt will present those questions and hopefully be able to answer them all. So I believe this presentation sort of split into two sections, one around Salmonella first, so then we'll have a bit of a Q&A around Salmonella, and then there'll be another Q&A at the end in terms of what that means within the cold supply chain. So Matt, I might hand over to you just so that you can sort of explain what you're doing in your program area and see that relates within this as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so again, I second the welcoming of Ian to talk about micro issues and cold chain shelf life and cold supply chain shelf life issues and measurement technologies. I just wanted to give a brief introduction as to where this sort of sits within the research work that we assist in funding and certainly fund and do the work ourselves. In our 5-year strategic plan, this would be under our product and process integrity theme, in which we have a sub-theme or a key area, which is the food safety side of things. So as part of this, we want to ensure that we're protecting our industry from a food safety perspective by looking at what potentially are emerging issues, and certainly working with people such as Ian and Long and the guys from MLA to actually understand what are the things that are emerging, so that we can ensure that we're meeting those challenges before they become an issue. So within the context of that, I'll hand you now over to Ian, and thank you very much, Ian, to present about Salmonella.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Amanda. First of all, let me apologise for you not being able to see me on the screen. We've had a couple of goes at it, but the technology just won't turn my camera on, and so we're defeated. But I probably know a lot of you, and you probably know me pretty well as well. So at least you know what the person who's talking to you looks like. So I'm presenting this today, but as Matt said, I work very closely with Long, and he would have probably presented some of this, but he's on leave today. So I want to talk first about Salmonella, an old foe that we know really well, but some new market risks coming along the line that we're just keeping a watch on. So this is really a briefing to let you know about stuff that's happening, and if anybody asks you or anything happens, then you can say, yep, we know about that. The MLA and AMPC program is looking after it. So just a quick recap on Salmonella. This graphic comes from the USA, so they're US figures, but it's just a nice summary. Sometimes we tend to think, well, Salmonella is just that thing we test on carcasses and we never find it, and occasionally we find it, and yeah, so what? But as you can see on this slide, up in the sort of top left-hand corner, in the US, it costs billions of dollars, and particularly in older people, it can lead to death. So it's not an insignificant illness, and probably compared to some of the other foodborne pathogens, like the STEC, it's actually probably more important than STEC. Salmonella is often seen as being a poultry thing, which is true, but there you can see some figures from the US that suggest 14% of salmonellosis is due to beef and pork in the US. So it can cause a nasty diarrhea and fever and abdominal cramps, and that's not very nice. And the usual food safety rules will look after it pretty well. So that's kind of salmonella in a nutshell. And the bottom line is that we need to do what we can to make sure that it doesn't get into the meat supply in a way that's going to cause any problems. Now this slide summarizes a little bit of data that comes out of Australia and some work done by the epidemiologists, foodborne disease epidemiologists at ANU, looking at outbreaks of Salmonella over a 15-year period. And this statement here is a quote from their publication, where they're saying that most of the Salmonella, 80% of Salmonella outbreaks really look like they were due to food, and eggs and egg-containing foods were the most frequently identified. And happy for us, outbreaks due to poultry, meat, beef, pork had a decreasing trend over that period. So on the right-hand side, you can see the grey bars showing you how many outbreaks got reported each year, and the black line is how many Salmonella were notified. And you can see that trend, both outbreaks and number of cases, number of people getting ill, has been going up for the last 20 years. But fortunately, we don't seem to be part of that problem. And the government has a foodborne disease reduction strategy running at the moment, and they're concentrating on Salmonella in eggs and poultry. So the good work that you all do has led to us being off the hook on this one. And you know, when I joined the industry, and probably even up until 10 years ago, people would always go Salmonella meat, you know, and you'd be lumped in with a Salmonella problem all the time, and we seem to have got off that. So that's a really good thing. But over in the US, you know, they still have some problems, and we've seen a couple of things happen about Salmonella recently. So this is a proposal for a performance standard in the US for Salmonella, and it really looks like it's only going to apply to US processors. There's nothing in it that suggests that Australian processors will have to follow suit. But this is what they're going to be required to do. So they'll be having samples collected every week from their establishments, and it's expected that they'll get samples at least 48 weeks out of every 52 when they collect samples for STEC testing. So this is manufacturing beef. They'll test it for STEC. They'll also test for Salmonella. Excuse me. I have been tested. And you're not allowed to have more than 2 out of those 48 positive for Salmonella. So what the FSIS proposes to do in the US is basically publish a name and shame list. And they hope that will have the effect of the offending processors lifting their game, because they will probably lose contracts as a result of being on the list. As I said, we think that won't apply to Australia. So if you hear something about it, you know, if you've got a customer in the US and they're expecting that you should do it, it's not looking like it's going to be a requirement on Australian processors. Now, what do we find in beef supply chains in terms of Salmonella? Because even though we can say, well, from a regulatory basis, we don't have to comply, we don't want to be, you know, we don't want to be contributing to problems in the US, so there may be some commercial pressure. And this summarizes some surveys that have been done over the years, looking from fecal samples through carcasses and lymph node and trims and through to ground product and offals, looking for how often we find Salmonella. And you can see here, something's not going to happen. Let me see. Here we go. Just have to use the space bar. So we think we should meet the US performance standard pretty well, because we only find, even when we've done a test to look at these 375 gram samples, the STEC type samples, we've only found Salmonella in less than 1%. So we're going to, all of our establishments on average will meet that 2 out of 48. So even though it's not a requirement for us, if anybody asks you as a country, we certainly meet that standard. We find it's, but this number is double the number of STECs that we find. So it is around a fair bit. This data in fecal samples and also carcass samples tells us that dairy animals are more likely to have Salmonella, 26%, and some calves with higher percentage on calf carcasses. So if you're processing a lot of dairy animals and that product's going to the US, that certainly is a little bit higher risk. The fact that we find so much more in calves, nearly 4% of calves positive, 10 times higher than cows and bulls, and I can't calculate how much higher than steers and heifers, then there's perhaps difficulty in processing calves, is perhaps why we find these high levels. Going through lymph nodes, we do find some lymph nodes with Salmonella, and certainly if you can remove lymph nodes where possible, then that will help to reduce Salmonella coming through in the final product. And this number here in ground beef, 1.1% positive. This is quite an old number. We haven't done this survey again in recent times, and this is 25 gram sample, was 1.1%. So FSIS, when they tested 375 gram samples, they're finding it in about twice as many. So in fact, ground beef in Australia, the last time we looked, didn't look great compared to US numbers. And we know that there are some risky raw ground beef components. So processing head meat does seem to be more risky for Salmonella. So if you want to minimize the likelihood of sending Salmonella to the US, then there's some raw ground beef components you shouldn't send. You should remove lymph nodes where possible, and avoid sending product from calves. So it's a little, though you're probably not sending that because of STEC. So we're pretty safe on that. But here's the new risk. In January this year, Bill Maher put a petition to FSIS, and it's called a citizen's petition. So any citizen can petition the FSIS to make rules. Maher isn't a normal citizen. Maher is the best known food safety litigation lawyer in the US, and he is petitioning the FSIS to declare outbreak strains of Salmonella to be adulterants. In brief, calling them adulterants means treating them like we treat STECs, 0157. So if Marla's petition is successful, then we could be headed down a track like we are with STEX on Salmonella going to the US. There've been a few petitions to FSIS in recent times, and many of them they've tossed out very quickly. This one they're sitting on. So I think they're thinking long and hard about how they respond to it. It's not going to be easy for them to respond. A bit unpredictable about how they will respond. We just have to wait and see. So the question is what about these serotypes of Salmonella? And you all get, if you find Salmonella, you send them off for serotyping, sometimes days or weeks later you get a result, you file it away. So what? Has been pretty much our response. But that's going to, if this petition is successful, then this will become important. So this table, it's the same columns as last time, pretty much the same surveys, and we've listed down here all of the serotypes that we found. Now, these serotypes that I've listed are all the outbreak serotypes that Bill Marla talks about in his petition. And he actually talks about a top 10, and then he talks about the others. Maybe he thinks that if he isn't lucky getting all of them declared adulterants, maybe he'll succeed with the top 10. What I've shown in that line just under the heading is what percentage or what fraction of the Salmonellas that we found were these outbreak serotypes. So in fecal samples, 66% of the Salmonella we found were these outbreak serotypes. On carcasses, about a quarter, 14 out of 41. Lymph nodes, well, we didn't find much, but 2 out of 5. Trim, 5 out of 9. Back over on offal, 7 out of 8 were outbreak serotypes. So on average, if we started to, if these outbreak serotypes were declared to be adulterants, maybe 2/3 of the Salmonella that you find or that you would find in product would likely be cause the product to be adulterated. So we just have to wait and see how FSIS deals with this. This is the kind of thing that takes a couple of years to happen, but we just have to wait and see. So these are my rough recommendations based on this. So at the moment, when you send samples off for STEC testing or you do the screening test yourself, I'm wondering whether it would be worth you testing for Salmonella, just so you know where you stand. I have put here what are the consequences, because different states have different rules about the need to notify. So don't want you to test and then have to be notifying the health department about these things. But if you don't have to notify the health department, you might be curious and want to know how much Salmonella you're actually getting in product. You should remove lymph nodes when possible. For some of you, if you're sending head meat to the US, then maybe you need to investigate head meat processing and just make sure that you're doing that well so that you remove contamination. And as an industry, I think we need to have a discussion, and Matt and I have had a little bit of a discussion already about, do we need to find better methods for processing cull cows, because we find more Salmonella there? Do we need better methods for processing calves? Maybe we should do a survey and know what we find domestically, because the data we've got is quite old. Excuse me. And this last point, I think, is something that will get looked after by the Americans anyway. But if 2/3 of the serotypes are going to be declared adulterants, then you need to have a good, quick method of working that out. So that's the end of Salmonella, I'm pretty sure. Yep. So I'm very happy to take questions if anybody has questions on the topic of Salmonella and market access.
Okay. Sorry, Amanda.
No, I was just going to say, so far you must be doing a great job, because I haven't got any questions come through yet, but maybe
Okay.
Matt.
Oh, we don't have to pretend to have questions.
I'm sure they're like keeping them all to the end for you, Ian.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think on this, I mean, it's something that, you know, I can understand people not having questions. It's just something we just have to wait and see what happens. And yeah, I can understand everybody's going like, I just don't want to know about this. No need to know about it till you need to know about it. So let's keep moving. Every now and again, my computer screen doesn't want to change. So I now want to go on and talk a little bit about cold chain, and this is the area that Long Hun is doing most of the work in, and so he's prepared most of this presentation. About the benefits of managing the cold chain. I'll want to show you some examples and talk to you about how people should do it, have done it, and talk also then about how you can do it as well. So let's get on to the benefits of managing the cold chain. And by cold chain, I'm meaning basic, you know, keeping that product cold from the time that you know, it leaves your cold store to the time that it's cooked for a consumer. And we've seen over the last couple of years that we've been able to put some things together and get a favorable position that we didn't have before. So we've used on the left there data loggers. We've used them for years and got data from them. Very hard to know what it means. I know you don't always retrieve the loggers. You only look at it when you need to. You look at a trace and you kind of ask for an opinion. Is this good or is it bad? And it's pretty hard to know. All you end up with is a very rough opinion, a feeling, and whatever. But now we've got the shelf life model that was developed through our funding to the University of Tasmania, and they've produced this model which allows us to put the time temperature data from a logger into the model, and it produces a prediction of how much shelf life has been lost. And this on the right hand side is just a close-up of what comes out. This blue line is the temperature that the product's experienced, and these little labels on here is what's happening at different parts of the journey. The green line is the shelf life that's lost, and then we're making a prediction from that point onwards. If the product's stored at 0 degrees or at 1 degree or 4 degrees, how much longer will the product last? And so what we found with this combination of data loggers and being this interpretation is that we're able to turn this what was just data, numbers, into information that we can use, and we end up with an action plan. And some of the early adopters of this have found problems in their cold chain, and they've set about fixing them. So what we've had in the last 5 years is the next leap in loggers. So, you know, we're now using data loggers like this one in the diagram, putting it into the shipment, and it's sending its data through to the cloud, all the way through the supply chain. and then we're able to see that on our laptop. And the data doesn't always come immediately. Sometimes it gets stored, and then you download it. Say when it ships at sea, you don't get it, but when the product gets to port and it gets unloaded, then you get some of the data. And so it means that you always get the data, and you get a lot of it in real time or close to real time. And these loggers have come down enormously in price, and they're not that much more expensive than the loggers you're using now, but you guaranteed the data, and you guaranteed the data now. And you can also get some additional data that I'll talk about in a minute. So you can get better deals, you can get benefits from this. So one processor that we've worked with was putting these loggers into their product, and they've got an agreement now with the retailer to greatly reduce the amount of shelf life testing that they do, because they've got the micro testing. They're not doing as much micro testing as they were. They're not putting a lot of raw material into shelf life tests. They're not spending a lot of time and effort doing those tests. And they reckon that they're saving $300,000 a year because of that agreement that they've got with the retailer. So I think if you're the QA manager, sort of negotiating these kind of things can make you a bit of a hero. So I think this is a good reason to do it. We found other people, other companies that have done some initial trials have been able to reduce claims. So they've reduced claim, this is a domestic supply chain, and they started using these loggers, and they've ended up getting no claims over a 3-month period, whereas before they'd paid over $10,000 in claims, and supplying new products. So that's a small win, but if you can do that with several customers, then you're really benefiting. In the international market, sometimes we found that there's less than ideal storage temperatures in Australia. And of course, those things are under your control, and they're fixable pretty easily, and they can make a significant difference to the shelf life of your product. Some people have used loggers and worked out which transport company they're going to use. They got some transport companies that are more reliable than others, but they're getting this data out, and that's meant that they can actually choose the transport company that does the best job. And we've seen, as we said, we've seen others reduce shelf life claims. So if you know your real cold chain, then it allows you to help your customers. As I said, there's a number of, on the right-hand side here, a number of different loggers that are available, and we don't have a preference of one over another. And some are probably more suitable to certain circumstances than others, and Long can give you some advice on that. So the benefits, knowing and managing real cold chain and shelf life can save you money and time and headaches. And I just remind everybody at the moment, one of the concerns that I've had is, if you supply the Middle East market, particularly if you're supplying lamb to the Middle East market, then some countries have allowed, an increase in the shelf life of product recently from 70 days to 90 days or even more. And your product might have just been making that 70 days. And now if it's allowing 90, then you might start to find that your product fails in the marketplace. So you can't just slap a new shelf life on your product because you're allowed to. You need to make sure that the temperatures in your cold chain right through to your customer are satisfactory. I don't think any of us want to see potentially millions of dollars benefit by changes in shelf life, and then we fall flat on our face because we're not managing our cold chain properly. So it's a little warning. So how did these companies get the data and get these benefits? So you do need to do some validation, a little bit of validation and initial work. You need to have some micro data, and pretty much if you're doing carton meat micro, that's probably enough. You need to be sure that you're getting the right temperature and times in your supply chain, and then using the model, you can verify what you get. Sometimes your customer might need a little bit of proof, a little bit of cajoling, and Long and I are very happy to help out with if anybody needs to present arguments to their customers. You find the gaps in your cold chain, so you can see here where temperature went up and it went down again during air freighting of product, and you know, you find out what's going wrong and fix these problems. So that's pretty simple to do, and that will reap the benefit. You'll reap the benefits from that. And so how do you do it? As I've said, there's lots of options around. Some have different battery life. Some record different things, not just temperature, but also some additional things. You can see here that some disposable loggers, you know, are costing around $50 to $100. There are also reusable ones, and if you're working within maybe, you know, between you and you know, a reliable warehouse or company warehouse in another country, then then you might be able to use reusable ones. So we can give you some advice about what to use. As I said, some of them record different things. They can record light, and we find that really to be really helpful because it tells you whether the carton has been opened. And sometimes we've seen journeys where cartons get opened, and you cause you to think, what's going on there? What's happened there? You also get location, and there's different methods of looking at location, and that has consequence for battery life. But knowing exactly where your product is when something goes wrong with the temperature is really valuable. So you can know, was it still on the ship or was it on the dock? Was it in the warehouse? Because you can get the data that accurate. You can get impact, so you can know, has product been dropped, humidity, you can know which way up the carton is. Has somebody turned it upside down and done strange things to it? And I'm not sure what this symbol is that Long had. Maybe it's just knowing what's happening at different times. But the loggers, as I said, different loggers will do different things. And you start being able to take this information and know whether that's good for your product. It also helps you to interpret the temperature and know what's happening. So if you want to do it yourself, I think you need to form a team within your company. I'm guessing today I'm mostly talking to QA managers, you know, but you know, you have your shipping managers and warehouse managers and people from sales, and you need good to have a team, particularly when it comes to taking some action. You need someone who can handle some numbers and a bit of technical stuff. The spreadsheet stuff on this isn't that difficult, but having someone who can do that sort of thing is really useful. And we have a number of resources available from us that document and provide that sort of help for you. We also can get you in contact with an external consultant. So we are paying for a number of external consultants to help analyze the data and provide you with, it can even provide you with reports. One of the reasons we're doing this is because we want to understand how you're using it so that we can modify the tool as necessary to make it more suitable. But it's also really important that we understand where problems are occurring and how you can get benefits from using it. So, you know, you've heard some real examples today. So we won't tell anybody your example in any more detail than that. We're not about giving away secrets, but we do need to have a little bit of information about how it's used and what the benefits are if you ask us to have somebody help you. So very happy to have a chat with anybody, answer any questions today, or have a chat with you afterwards, or give Long a call and have a chat with him about how to do it. So in summary, if you know and manage the cold chain, the real cold chain, not what you imagine, and shelf life, then it can save you money and time. If you do some monitoring of your cold chain and shelf life trials, you can actually take control of your product and you minimize having problems. And there's lots of options available on how to do that. So we want to help you reduce complaints and lost money and headaches. And with that, very happy to take questions.
Okay, Ian, I do have a couple of questions, but unfortunately they must have come up just after you started talking about the cold chain stuff. So they're about Salmonella.
Yeah, people were so busy listening that they didn't have time to write questions at the same time. That's okay. We can go back to Salmonella questions.
Okay, I got two posts from Abby Satish. Abby Satish.
He always asks difficult questions.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm sure you've got this one under control. Can you elaborate? Oh, hold on. Oh, got another one come up. Can you elaborate on consequences having a positive in any particular state and what action may need to be taken for the products that are tested positive?
Yeah, okay. So some laboratories, some states require laboratories to report the detection of Salmonella. And some states it's for all product. Some states it's only for certain foods. I'm pretty sure, for example, that Queensland actually has an exemption for meat, but you just have to check your state. Now I know Abby's got his own lab, so has to find out the answer for himself. But if you're sending samples off to a laboratory, then the laboratory will definitely know what the requirements are.
Okay, fair enough. Kathy Tringham has asked, have you any information or figures on Salmonella in lamb?
I'm sure we do. I'm very happy to talk with you about that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that we've got a very, very recent report that's got stuff on Salmonella in lamb. I just don't remember the numbers, Kathy, and very, very happy to send you something.
Okay, fantastic. Now, this one is from Zara Naqvi. Thanks for a very nice presentation. Zara is a PhD student at CSU working on sous vide cooked beef. Zara's question is regarding cooked meat products. What is the prevalence of Salmonella in ready-to-use meat products or low-temperature, long-time cooked meat, such as sous vide?
I think you'll become the expert on that. You might be able to tell us. Look, I think it should be very low, because you saw the figures of what we find on primals. Is a very low percentage. Sometimes, we test 1,000 samples and don't find any Salmonella or only a couple. So I think it should be low. And maybe you have to tell me what temperature sous vide is, or Matt might be able to tell me. But you should get some death of Salmonella at that temperature. You certainly don't get growth.
Yeah, my thoughts, Ian, would be that there's, Salmonella from if you're looking at thermal death charts from say from approved person's perspective, they're certainly quite low temperatures and quite short times really in comparison to say something like a Clostridium botulinum. So therefore, I'd imagine something around this. If you're going 60, 65 degrees for an extended period of time,
yeah.
You've got to have stuff in there to start with. The fact that you've got a vacuum pack generally within a sous vide, well, you have to as a sous vide, and
yes,
I'm not sure that it's going to be as much an issue as potentially what might be thought.
No,
that's what,
no.
I mean, that's off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look at charts.
Yeah, and look, my feeling about sous vide in general is that if it's done according to the rules, the recommendations, then it's pretty safe, and it really depends on people following the recommendations, and making sure that particularly temperature control is very good.
Yep. Here we go. We're cooking meats at 65 and 75 degrees. I'd say you're going to have negligible issues from a Salmonella perspective.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. The maximum growth temperature of Salmonella, I think, is around mid-40s. So if you're going 20 degrees above that, then you're starting to should be having quite significant death rate.
You would think so.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question from Ian Christensen as well. How widely is temperature monitoring along the supply chains practiced?
It's not practiced anywhere near enough. I think it's one of these things where I think people haven't done it a lot, or they just rely on the temperature control being adequate. And when we start looking, I mean, I actually am talking with a processor today who's had some significant issues with customer complaints over shelf life, and finding some significant problems. That they send off the product, and they're thinking it's going straight to, let's say, to North America, but they don't realize that the product may be, the shipping company going all around New Zealand first, or that the product goes to Malaysia or Singapore, and then it gets across to the US, and so it's arriving 10 days or 15 days later than they expect, and so it's sitting for a long time. So there's just not enough monitoring, and we've tended to just take things for granted. Somebody contacted me a couple of days ago and said, they've had problems in the Australian domestic market during this COVID period because they've had product that, I think they normally put 40 days shelf life on the product, and that's fine in food service in Australia usually, but now, because restaurants have been closed or, operating at a much lower rate, people have been holding their product for a lot longer and then complaining about the quality of it. And because, you know, we tell people out there in food service and retail 0 to 4. And, you know, the model tells us the difference between 0 and 4 is enormous. But the communication that's on our packages, you know, and that's taught, you know, through food safety courses and stuff for retail and food service is keep the stuff at 0 to 4. And we have to educate our customers that, yeah, you can keep it at 4 degrees, but don't expect to keep it for anywhere near as long as if you're going to keep it at close to 0.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on that. I think people mistake the not growing of pathogens with you're not going to get growth of spoilage bacteria, and they confuse the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like best before and use by, you know.
Yeah, that's always confusing.
Now, at the moment, I don't think I've got any further questions, Ian. I think you've got off a relatively well from that perspective.
Yeah.
You
Well,
must have been very, very good at explaining your
well,
work.
I'll only feel that it's successful if people actually do something with this, particularly the shelf life work. And I know that, as I said before, that I think most people on this call are probably QA managers, and because I'm not actually standing physically in front of you, I might be a little bit braver than normal and say, you know, that maybe, you know, you think this isn't something that you're responsible for and other people in the business care about. But if you can actually communicate this to the people in the business who do care, then I would appreciate that, because I think we've got something here that potentially will earn the industry millions of dollars just by doing a better job with our product. You know, and you won't have to deal with customer complaints, or at least, you know, you'll be able to deal with customer complaints pretty easily, or you won't get the complaints. You won't be having to sort of suddenly air freight product to the other end of the world because, you know, product's no good and you've got to replace it. You know, the cost of all these things on our business is huge, and we certainly have to get the message through to the people who you know, care about that bottom line and can make things happen. Most of it probably has to happen with your colleagues, not with you.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll use the analogy of a place that I used to work in. We worked out it was about $250 every time we had a complaint from food service, because you know, we'd have a salesperson going out there, they'd bring the product back, we'd have to provide replacement product, we'd have to have someone looking at it, someone to write a report, someone to process the credits, and if we just gave them $100 and said, you know, we'll knock $100 off your bill, it actually saved us $150.
Yeah.
You know, those little steps in understanding, just taking some of that stuff off it, and you know, it's like if you put something and control your temperature, you're able to actually work out where the issue was and attribute the claim appropriately to the appropriate partner in the supply chain, which might help your insurance costs in the long term.
Yep. Look, insurance costs, you know, I mean, your insurance, I mean, your shipper's insurance, you know, claiming on your shipper's insurance isn't free. You know, the shipper is going, gee, meat's a risky commodity, we're always getting claims, and they'll charge you more for shipping the product. So, you know, so even if you making a claim on your shipper's insurance, you're paying for it. So
it's factored into cost.
You know, and we get used to this, because we couldn't deal with it. We didn't have a good way of dealing with it. You know, and now with these kind of data loggers that will make sure you get the data and will tell you exactly where the product was when it went wrong, you know, and the model to interpret, is this a big problem or is it not a big problem? You know, we've got tools now that we didn't have 3 years ago to solve these problems. And I can kind of understand why people didn't think about them. They didn't think about them because there was nothing they could do. The message is now there is.
Yep. I think that's really good message. And I suppose in the absence of any other questions, we can hand you back 8 minutes of everyone
Yes.
back 8 minutes of their day.
I can have a cup of tea before the next meeting and the next presentation.
Again, thank you very much, Ian, for presenting on these two areas that are very important to us from a food safety and obviously a product quality perspective. You know, I'm sure that you'll get some direct contact out of this, asking for assistance around things for shipment and tracking shipments. So I can only again thank you very much for presenting on behalf of AMPC and on behalf of the processing industry, and thank you everyone who attended today. I'll hand over to Amanda now.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, Ian. A very informative webinar as always. You're always presenting us with some really good information. So just further to what Ian was saying in terms of getting this information out, this webinar has actually been recorded, so you can actually go to the AMPC YouTube playlist and copy the link and send it around to you know, other people like your sales managers that may not have been able to attend, production staff, supervisors and that. And I know some companies have been doing that on some of the other webinars, so it's a really good way to be able to keep people up to date. So thank you, Ian. And just for everyone, next week's webinar is going to be next Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it's going to be on Matt Deegan. So we're going to the environmental space around environmental performance of the red meat sector, and Gareth Ford and Max Barnes from All Energy are going to be presenting on that one. So registrations have just opened for that. So we look forward to seeing some of you next week. And by all means, if you've got any other questions, please feel free to get in touch with Ian Long, or also if it's more of an AMPC side of things, Matt O'Brien would be the best contact within AMPC. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Amanda.